Well, hey everybody, and welcome to Thursday Live. Thanks so much for joining me. And I know that, as usually happens, some of you have been waiting already, and I appreciate that so very much. And others of you will be hopping on and hopping on and hopping on. And I tell you, one of the things that I have gotten the most amount of comment on in the past several weeks of my Thursday Live is about Lincoln. Where's Lincoln? We want to see Lincoln. So I thought right here at the beginning, when everybody's starting to get on and populate, that I would show you Lincoln. And the reason I haven't shown him is it's a little bit harder with my setup these days and how it's been to move the camera, but I'm going to do that anyway. And he's sitting here right next to me. Hey, Lincoln. Lincoln, say hi. There he is, right there. The ever-loving Lincoln, so disinterested and unaffected. So, and look at that, there he goes. He is down for the count. As long as I'm here, and this is how we should be in the hands of God, as I said during the very first days of our pandemic shutdown at Northridge, he is with me what we should be with our great God. At ease and comfortable, as long as we know God's around, we should be okay. And of course, we make it more complex than that, but Lincoln does not. Laying right here beside me, happy that I'm here, and didn't even care about you guys. Sorry about that, but if you were here, he would. When I'm away, traveling for ministry or vacation or whatever, and Lincoln's not able to be with us, obviously, when we travel that way, he is unaffected by FaceTime or Skype. He just doesn't engage it. He only engages in-person reality. But here we are, having learned and still learning how to feel connected, be affirmed, be lifted up, even though it's through technology like this. And again, if you just populated onto Thursday Live, welcome to Thursday Live. So glad you're connecting with me and glad to have you here. And if you're a guest, welcome. I hope it won't be the last time you get with us. And of course, Thursday Live is our breakaway moment where we get to think about all things faith and all things God, and we get to stir each other up to love and good works. And I get to keep you connected to what's going on at Northridge as well. And that's one of my great privileges, to be the senior pastor at Northridge and to be a part of this great spiritual family that God has built and continues to build. And I'm thrilled that so many of you are a part of it. And many of you who are geographically displaced from us all around the country and even in other countries are engaging us and making this a part of your spiritual life. And I'm glad to have you as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with two things that I just can't wait to tell you. And then I'm going to get to my spiritual thought, and we'll pray and be done tonight. But I have to tell you, I'm one of these people that it's really hard for me to keep a gift that I have that I'm excited about giving. I want to give it. It's very difficult. It takes a ton of discipline. And it's kind of how I feel about these two updates on what's coming down the pike at Northridge in the next several weeks. And I'm just going to give you the gift right now. Can't wait until the end of Thursday Live, and then we'll get to our spiritual thought. The first one is this, and this is fun. I did a half announcement about this last week on Thursday Live. And that is the fact that next week, at this time, during our normal Thursday Live, we are going to have a worship night. And our team has been praying and choosing songs and working on them and getting them ready. And it's going to be a phenomenal worship night next Thursday night. At this time, Thursday Live, it's going to be our Thursday Live, but I announced that half of it last week. This is the half I didn't announce. It's not just going to be online. It is going to be the very, very first worship night that we've had in the last year since this pandemic and the shutdown happened. That is in person as well. And so next Thursday, Thursday Live is going to be a worship night, and yes, you can do it online, and cherish that many of you will do that, especially those of you who are all over the world. But those of you who are close to the Plymouth campus or within driving distance of the Plymouth campus, you can be a part of that worship night next week, live and in person. And I hope a bunch of you show up for it. It's going to be phenomenal, and I look forward to introducing that and then releasing you into it. It's going to be a really encouraging night. It starts at 7:16, just like Thursday Live. And here's my request. Get the word out. Tell as many people as you can about it, okay? And the other exciting Northridge gift that I want to open for you right here at the beginning of Thursday Live, and this is, I think, going to make a huge difference in so many of your lives, those of you who are part of the Northridge family. Ridge Kids is our kids ministry, and Ridge Kids is opening the weekend of March 13 and 14. So not this weekend or the next weekend, but the next weekend, March 13th and 14th, and Ridge Kids is opening at all of our campuses, and I'm telling you, they've worked really hard to make sure that we can do it appropriately and safely within guidelines, and the volunteers are regathering. It's just going to be an exciting time. And if you'd like information about it, go to our website at northridgechurch.com/kids. northridgechurch.com/kids, and you can get more information and register. So that you can be sure to be a part of that. And I just be praying for the team, be praying for the families. I think it's going to be just an exciting time as we go forward. Thursday Live, worship night, in person, online, next Thursday, and then March 13th and 14th at Ridge Kids. Man, I hope you're chatting it up in comments, whether you're YouTube or on Facebook Live. Listen, this is an exciting thing. We're continuing to move forward as a church. There's been a lot of work involved in it, and it's exciting. So I just am really thankful for all that's going into that, and that God's giving us the privilege of moving forward. I guess Lincoln's not content in this moment. So at any rate, so now I want to move on to our spiritual thought. Lincoln, come here. Come here, buddy. Good boy. Sit. You don't have to protect me. You're okay. There he goes. He doesn't know this is a live broadcast. And if you're a guest here, we don't put on airs. We're just real people. In fact, that's the point of Thursday Live. It's about me not being, not approaching this in a professional way, but instead approaching this in a very personal way. Okay. The spiritual thought I want to share with you is a big one. In fact, it's story based. And if you've been here the last couple of weeks, then you know that I've told the story of coming to faith and tried to package it in ways that could encourage and challenge you and give you hope. And last week I talked about the story of the calling that I've been given by God, and how all of us, of course, are called to different things, and tried to make it relevant and applicable to your life as well. And I've had a lot of positive feedback. Second only to the Lincoln stuff that I mentioned earlier. I've had a lot of positive feedback about couching the spiritual challenges and thoughts of Thursday Live in the context of story. And when you think about it, it makes a ton of sense. First of all, Thursday Live is really about a more personal connection and relationship building exercise. Me as the pastor of Northridge with you, and then you commenting and doing all those things, which is great. As well, there's nothing we can relate to more than the story of someone's lives, and when the story of someone's life, and when the truth is the basis of it, the foundation of it, it's big. And it's really makes sense when you think about the fact that much of the Bible is given to us through narrative, through story. And so that's what I'm going to do with you. And I've been thinking a lot about the idea of how faith becomes a real experience in our lives. And all of us have to live by faith. It doesn't matter how long we've been following Jesus or, trying to turn to his truth as our basis for life. It takes faith. But in the beginning days, it's really difficult because not only is it all new, but we have no personal interaction with the fulfillment of God's promises, the impact of God's promises in our life. In fact, this is true for me. And I have now been on this journey for, 45 years in my own personal life. And a lot of water's gone under the bridge. I still have to grow in faith. I still need to hear how God's working. But over the course of time, I've experienced God working in very, very real ways that helps me to take my next step of faith because I experienced him in that last step of faith. But when I first came to faith, and I think this is going to be valuable for you wherever you're at on the journey of faith. I know it still encourages me. When I first came to faith, I had no experience with the genuine reality and impact of God's promises coming true in my life, of God working in a real way, as his promises say he will, but of God actually working and fulfilling those promises in my real story. I had no experience with it. And I know many of you out there could say, yeah, that's me. So here's what I did in those days, and still do, by the way. I got the story of how God fulfills his promises and what the unbelievable impact of it is and what the journey of that is like. I got the story of that from others. And here's what you might not know, but for me, because of the way my journey unfolded and what my relationship patterns were at the time, for me, basically the only stories I had of those who had really experienced God's promises in significant ways were the stories that God gave us in the Bible. I mean, my dad didn't come to faith that much before I came to faith, and the same with my brothers and family. So we weren't a family where people had experienced this over great periods of time, and so I had to turn to the stories of those in the Bible who experienced God's working in their lives, fulfilling his promises in significant ways. And this is why, and I still do, I love the stories of Abraham and Moses and David and Paul. Many of you have seen the series that I have done over the years called Origins, and I go to Israel and other parts of where the biblical narrative and God's work unfolded throughout history and try and bring these stories to life today in the 21st century because they're so impacting. God worked in their lives, changed their lives, impacted their lives because he was true to his promises, and these people experienced it. It was great. So when I'd come across a promise of God in those early days, they were all new to me. Every new promise I came to was new. Every promise I came to was new. And so when I came across a promise of God, I'd look for its reality in the stories of these great people in the faith. Oh, where did that story unfold in the life of Abraham or Moses or David or Paul or Joseph or whoever? For example, and this is what the story I'm going to share with you is kind of based on, Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. This is a pivotal passage in my life. Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, not partially, not incompletely. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. And because God knows that the complexity of our need to understand gets in the way of trusting, he says, don't lean on your own understanding. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. You're not going to be able to figure out how God works. You're not going to be able to figure out how God's going to fulfill his promise. You're not going to be able to figure these things out. So trust in the Lord with all your heart, not leaning on your own understanding. Instead, trusting in him, not your understanding. Trusting in him, not having to figure it all out or know that you've experienced it already. In all your ways, acknowledge him, put him first, obey him. Follow him. Live according to his design. And he will make your path straight. He'll get you to the right places. Doesn't say everything will always work out well and we'll never die. Doesn't say any of that. It says he'll get us to the right place. He'll make the path straight. He'll do exactly what he's promised to do. And when I first came across that in the Bible, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, and all your ways acknowledge him and make your path straight. Man, all I had to do is look to Abraham and go, he had to trust the Lord. He didn't understand where he was going, how he was going to have a kid when he was 100 and his wife was 90. It just does. None of this made sense to him. He just had to trust the Lord, not lean on his own understanding. And so he acknowledged God, followed God, obeyed God. And what happened? God made his path straight, did exactly what he promised. Moses, he had to trust the Lord. Even when he couldn't figure it out, he couldn't figure out how God was going to part the Red Sea or that he was going to. He just knew that God was going to fulfill his promises. So he trusted in God even when he couldn't figure it out and the complexities of it. And he acknowledged God, and God made his path straight. The same happened with David and Joseph and Paul. And I started seeing it. Oh, that's how it looks in a life. That's how it looks in a story. And all their stories were different, and all their callings were different, and all their experiences were different. But I saw how that truth worked. And I was able to process it and apply it a little bit better. But they all experienced its reality. And I have to tell you, as much as I loved and still today love seeing how God's promises were fulfilled and how they impacted the lives of the stories of those in the Bible, I wasn't satisfied with seeing God at work in other people's lives. I wanted to see and experience God at work in my life, fulfilling his promises in my life, impacting the reality of my journey in the story I was living. And then it hit me. And I want it to hit you too. Before these great men and women of God in Scripture had stories of God's promises being fulfilled in their lives and impacting their stories and him working these things out and doing these great things, before that ever happened in their story, they had to first put their faith in the promises of God like I was. Having never experienced them, like I was then and am now when God's calling me to walk on new paths and new ways and confront new giants and new challenges, they had to first put their faith in the promises of God by seeing and hearing God's promises fulfilled and God's promises impact people in the story of others. Abram, before he became Abraham, had to hear it from others. Moses, we know, he sat on his mother's knee. She weaned him even though she was being raised in Pharaoh's household. And she told him the unfolding stories of God's promises and the great impact he made in people's lives. And it helped Moses build a faith that allowed him to trust God when he didn't understand, so that then he could experience God making his path straight and working. It's a big deal. And so I was encouraged by their stories to trust God in a way that would help me to experience him fulfilling his promises and doing great works in me. I was motivated by their stories to trust in the Lord even when I didn't understand. My circumstances would be different, the challenges would be different, the outcomes would be different, but God wouldn't be. And to trust him even when I didn't understand, and just keep acknowledging him and following him and obeying him and believing that he would make my path straight, and he would. And as is always true with God, when I genuinely, and I haven't always and still don't always, but when I genuinely trusted him, instead of leaning on my own understanding, when I trusted him beyond what I could understand, God worked. Sometimes it was in small ways that wouldn't be impressive to you in story, and sometimes it was in huge ways, as we've seen God do the great work of what he's done at Northridge, and as I've seen personally God do some things in the midst of my family. And so these things became a part of my story. And I just want to share one with you, okay? One. And it's a big one. In fact, if you've ever read the book that I wrote called Change Your Church for Good, If you haven't, don't worry. Only about 30 people on the whole planet have ever read it. But that's a bit of hyperbole. But Change Your Church for Good is where I kind of tried to write out the stories of what God did and the principles God used and the things I learned through the process of God doing what he's done at Northridge in the earlier days. And I actually recorded this story in that book. And who knows, you might be hearing this story on a weekend sometime, but I just thought it'd be a great way. Since Thursday Live is like an insider's edition, more of a personal thing, you deserve to experience all this stuff first. And I don't have it planned for a talk right now, but this might inspire me to put it in one. But I had been at Northridge at this church. It was then called Temple. And we were in Redford, Michigan, about 20 miles east of where we're located now. And it was, you've heard stories of this, it was in a very difficult strait. I came in, we had a very tough time introducing change and leading change and helping people once again find themselves trusting God's promises and trusting instead of trusting the way they'd done before. And we had gone through a lot, 3-4 years. And then God started doing a work, and we started believing that God wanted us, since most of our congregation was about 15, 17 miles west, and we were just reaching a huge community of people there. We started believing, and because our facility wasn't philosophically designed according to the way we were doing ministry in that day, it was more of an orator's environment instead of a communicator's environment. It was kind of cold and harsh and huge, and we were bouncing around. It was just so much about it that didn't fit who God was calling us to be, that we decided we needed to move, relocate, which wasn't an easy thing. And it was a huge building, not a lot of property, but a huge building. It had like 3,300, 3,500 people, and huge auditorium, large ceilings, and it was just big. If you've ever seen it in Redford, it was a big deal. And there was no one at the time. We wanted to move, but to move, we would have needed the equity of this building. And we couldn't think of anyone on the planet who would want this building in our area. It wasn't good for a government building, wasn't good for a school, education. Really, the only thing it could fit was a church, it seemed, and couldn't figure it out. I had no clue what we were going to do. I knew God was leading us to move. I had no idea how we were going to be able to sell this building in a relevant way. And quite frankly, I wanted it to go on as a church. I didn't want to not leave a church in that space, but it was beyond me. And I just was trusting the Lord. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't figure it out. I didn't understand the complexities. I just kept acknowledging God. God, if you want us to do this, you'll make it happen. I'm having a hard time seeing how, but I'm going to trust you to make my path straight. About 2 years before we needed to move, about 2 years before, all of a sudden, I can't remember the circumstances or the time of day or anything. I just remember it with a significant clarity that it happened. I was spending time with God, talking to God, doing something, and all of a sudden, what I didn't understand, it was like I did. I didn't hear a voice from the sky, Goodyear blimp didn't go by, no hand appeared and wrote things on my office wall. None of that happened. But clarity, the understanding hit me that I couldn't have figured out. And here's what I got. There was a church called Word of Faith and a pastor called Keith Butler. By the way, Word of Faith's still around. Keith Butler's still around and became a very good friend of mine and our ministry in those days. But I had never met Keith, didn't know anything about Keith, didn't know anything about Word of Faith. Nothing. The only thing I knew was they were bigger than we were, a lot bigger than we were. He was city councilman. That's all I knew. And the clarity came, Keith Butler's going to buy this building. Word of Faith needs this building. They're going to buy this building. I didn't know the guy, didn't have any understanding of it. It just came to me. And whoa, that's crazy. And here's what I did. I decided to sit on that. well, God, if that's going to happen, you're going to have to make that happen because I don't know this person. I wouldn't know how to approach it. It'd be crazy. It's just, I'm going to just trust you, not understand how you're going to make that happen. I'm going to acknowledge you and let you make the path straight. 2 years later, I'm going to make this story a little shorter, but you'll get it. 2 years later, I just sat on this a long time. My executive assistant, Debbie Bennett at the time, hi Debbie if you're watching, got a call from Word of Faith, and it was the business manager of Word of Faith calling and saying that Keith Butler and he would like to have a meeting with me. And I said, absolutely, let him come on over. And this was out of the blue. We had never met. Our social circles had never gone. Our church circles weren't anywhere in the same thing. I mean, just out of the blue, called to thing. And I knew why he was calling. So I said, yeah, let's make it as soon as possible. Keith, just a tall, great-looking, phenomenal leader for the kingdom of God, walked in my office, and his business manager walked in my office, and it was just me and can't remember. I had one other person, maybe my business manager, sitting with me, and and we were a really small church. In fact, we were about 10-20% the size of Keith Butler's church at the time. And he sat down and he goes, I just have to start the meeting this way. And I said, okay. And he said, God told me to tell you that you're supposed to sell your building to me, to Word of Faith. And he said, I have to just say that right up front because it's ridiculous, it's crazy, but I'm telling you, God told me to tell you that you're supposed to sell this building to me, to Word of Faith. And I went, okay. I wasn't surprised. And now, trust me, it was crazy that was happening. But I wasn't surprised because God had given me clarity of some understanding of that earlier on when I couldn't understand. I was trusting him and just came. And I want you to know this doesn't happen a ton. I'm not saying this is how God always works. I'm not saying he spoke out loud, but I mean, I knew that this was going to happen. And he had confirmed that in my heart. And here it is. And the guy's saying that God, and I know how God spoke to him, but God told me that you're supposed to sell this building to me. But as a leader, I have a stewardship to the people that God's called me to lead, to, the church that we are. And so I didn't overreact, and I didn't go, oh my gosh, and that kind of thing. And so here's how I responded to Keith. I said, well, Keith, if God told you that I'm supposed to sell you this building, then God's going to give you the right price to offer us. I don't know. I was really young at the time. God gave me wisdom beyond my years. It was bold. It was probably a bit brash. I wasn't being mean. He certainly wasn't. But both of us were really strong leaders. And they went away for a day and called back. And they came back with a price really quite a bit above what we thought our minimum could be, quite a bit above what market value could have been expected to be. And as it turns out, it's because they really believe in advancing God's kingdom, not just their church, but the whole of God's kingdom. And they wanted it to be a win-win. And God was all over this thing. And let me just tell you what happened. That passage, that one promise, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, acknowledge God in all of your ways, and he'll make your path straight, went from just being something that I saw at work in Abraham's life and Moses' life and David's life and Joseph's life and Paul's life and Daniel's life and all of these great characters of Scripture's life, in Moses' mother's life, and Deborah, one of the judges of Israel's life, and in Priscilla's life in the New Testament, all these people's lives. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 went from just something I believed in because I saw it work in the stories of others to something I was able to claim because I had experienced it unfolding in my story. I had now experienced what Moses did. trusting God even when I didn't understand, not because I had experienced it, but because I saw it in the stories of others. And now I've experienced time and time again, big ways and small ways, God do it. The next step is always still hard for me. But I've experienced his promise and the impact of it being fulfilled in my life. And it's changed my world. And it can change yours. And here's my prayer. My prayer is that maybe my story can, in a little way, maybe in a small way, help you to trust God and trust his promises just a little bit more, a little bit longer, a little bit more confidently, a little bit more boldly as you take the next step of your journey, so that you can experience the reality and impact of God's promises at work in your story. Because it's when what you see God promise and then how you see it impact and lived out in the story of others then becomes the reality of your own experience in your journey with God. That is when your relationship with God begins to blossom and flourish in life-changing ways. Don't get me wrong. Doesn't mean every day I get up and I'm emboldened to live by faith in the greatest way. I still falter. I still fail. Next step challenges like the one we've been in this last year and the one we're in now as we continue to move forward can still cause me to have a real difficult time understanding how God's going to do it and what God's doing. But because I've seen it before in impossible circumstances, it helps me to take the step to trust in the Lord with all my heart, not lean on my own understanding, but in all my ways acknowledge him and let him make the path straight. Let him work out the details. And I hope this has encouraged you just to trust his promises. Look for him in the stories of others, stories from back then and stories from right now. But live out your faith today, so that God can fulfill his promises in you as you trust him. It'll change your world. Well, I'm really glad you joined me this week for Thursday Live. I really am. I hope this has been encouraging. I hope you've left comments and made comments, and maybe you've experienced God's working like this or in your life. Love to hear about those, and love to know what story in the Bible brings the most amount of meaning to you and all of that stuff. That'd be great. What story are you looking to right now? And how does this story of me and Keith Butler and Northridge and what God's done, how does that impact you? I'd love to hear about it. But right now, I'd love to pray with you. I want to pray for the worship night next week, and I'm excited about that. I want to pray for Ridge Kids that's going forward. I want to pray for each and every one of you as you continue each day to be steadfast, unmovable, and always abound in being faithful to God, because that's the only thing that doesn't come up empty in the end, okay? I'm going to pray for you, and then I'll pray for this weekend services. So let's pray. Father, thanks so much for every single person who's experiencing Thursday Live right now, whether live or on demand later. I just really pray, God, that you'd let them experience the reality of your promises at work in their lives, being fulfilled and impacting them. And God, to get there, to that level of faith, we just have to see your promises lived out in the story of others. And so I thank you for Abraham and Moses and David and Paul and all the others who have lived out your truth so that we can see what it means when a human applies it. And God, I want to thank you that you're not just alive back then with them, you're alive with us today. You didn't just fulfill promises for them, you fulfill your promises today. You're as real now as you've ever been. And I just pray for each person here to trust you with all their heart. Whatever they're facing, not to lean on their understanding, not to stop trusting you because they can't figure stuff out, because things aren't working out, because they're facing challenges they don't understand. Let them just keep trusting you with all their heart and acknowledge you in every one of their ways and choices. And then, God, help us to experience the reality of you making our paths straight, doing what only you can do, getting us to the right place at the right time in the right way. And God, I do pray for Ridge Kids and the volunteers and the staff and the team. Thanks that we're getting to move forward with it. Let it impact families and lives. Let it help us to wake the world up to Jesus even more. I pray that you'd inhabit the worship night next week, both in person and online attendees, and just really, wow, change us as we experience your presence. And God, we pray for this weekend that you'd just really pour yourself out as we begin this new series all about you. And God, I think of Keith Butler and Word of Faith. Bless them. Thank you for the way you used them in our lives and used us in their lives. And thank you for allowing them to be a part of the story of God in our lives. And we'll just thank you for it. We love you, God, in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, I just have one more thing to say. I said it in the prayer, but I want to say it to you. This weekend, I am absolutely ecstatic about being able to get on that platform and once again be with you in person and teaching. For those of you who are gathered at Plymouth, be with you at all of our campuses. Grosse Ile, so glad you're a part of this place. And Brighton, thank you so much. Be with you guys and in your live worship experiences on your campus and with all of you online. The series is On God. I can't be more excited. Hope you'll be praying for me. I'm praying for you. Thanks for joining me on this Thursday Live. We'll see you this weekend. Bye, everybody.